One of the things we need to make sure we bear in mind is traceability and transparency. That means that we've got to make sure that when we read in a JSON file that's nested, that we can re-nest that file so that it looks something like the original. Obviously, if we've done transitions to it or anything like that, it has to still be representative of the original data. The challenge we have is that when we're trying to do profiling, that's no good, because you've got lists in there and all sorts of things like that, that it sees as being individual entries, that we see as being a single entry. So the way that we get around this is by doing it as a action intent. So our action intent can be found within feature selection. So what we're doing is we're creating a feature selection from our environment. Then what we're then doing is loading up the JSON file with all the individual data within it. What I'm actually also doing is splicing it down. It's quite a big file, so I'm splicing it down to 8 for the purposes of demonstration. This here is really just doing values for a loop. So what we're going to have to do is create a loop that loops through the changes we want to do, but I didn't want to do that here because I wanted to show it broken apart. So you could do it, but that's the initial start of creating that loop. So the first thing we want to do is check that the data itself works with the aggregation that we want to choose, which is selecting the first from a list. So we want to make sure that there's only one example in each of these, so that we're not missing out multiple examples or multiple lists or things like that. So otherwise then we'd definitely store the lists. But as you can see from looking at just one of the items, what we're doing, by the way, this is a regular expression. So it's going through the nested of all the nested added together and creating a count. So you can see with phone number for all of the nested, there's actually only one representation of phone number. And this is the same for all the values that are within here. They all have a single value count or naught value count with some of them. So again, we've done this, and you'll notice I've used things like save intent to false, because I don't want to save it into my environment there, into my intent library or intent model. So therefore I'm just using it as a visual tool to be able to look at and play around with. And obviously what I'm not doing is copying it into my my original table. I'm literally just looking at it. But what I'm using is the fs.tools, fs for feature selection, .tools, .auto aggregate, passing it through the table that stuff's going to come from, giving it an action, in this case it's count, giving it some sort of headers or regular expression, telling it the headers then to go to. Now we'll look at this in more detail, the next one. So now I know that these are all ones. What I want to do is I want to create it so they become a single list rather than multiple lists. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, the moment this all looks like this, where you've got lots of nested stuff and things like that. Now you'll notice within here there's no name and there's no telephone number. That's because I've already processed these just to show you, and I'll show you how to process these. Down the bottom you'll see that these have now been turned into a single column of phone numbers and email addresses. Now obviously this is no good for transparency and traceability. In other words, we can't turn this back into the original nested data, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So therefore what are we doing? So the first thing we're doing is, again, using auto aggregate, passing through the table, giving it an action. In this case we're saying create a list, take the first item from that list. So what this creates is a list of one item and a bunch of nulls. So it gets rid of all the nulls and we're left with a single item. That will be the phone number or whatever. we're then saying drop all the tables that that are in the table. So I drop all the columns that are in the table because we no longer need those anymore because they've been replaced by the new table. Give us a regular expression, in other words, what the headers. In this case, we're using a regular expression because we're saying give us all of the stuff that listed that's got at least 1 to 2 characters within it, and the thing we're specifically looking for is character and phone number. Then what we want to do is we want to pass it over into contact medium and then a single column that we're giving it, so that that now has got rid of all of the list and has replaced it with a single value. And do not forget to include some sort of intent order. So remember, -1 means just give me the next one. So you could type in here 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but the best plan is just type in -1 and it'll create the next number along. So therefore, what we've done is we've copied all that into result. So just to see what we've done, we can now go into the result column that we created and have a look at what we've got. So you can see there we've got all the phone numbers that were provided to us, and obviously nonsense numbers. They should be better, we could improve that. But in essence, they're a list of all the phone numbers now that we've got that are now a column within our results table. So the next thing we're doing is, and again I stress this will just be put into a loop for all of the columns, but I wanted to break it up so you can see what's going on. So the next one is taking that results table, create the first list action again, but this time we're looking at email address. So, and again we're putting into characteristic email address, and we're copying all that into results. And again, when we look down, now the interesting thing about email addresses is that there's a load of nulls. So you can see that these columns are all filled out, but some of these have nulls next to them, and obviously the two columns match up. So so this one has a phone number and an email address, whereas the third one down only has a phone number. And we do that with all of them. So now what about transparency and traceability? Really, really important, because now we've changed the characteristics of the data, the original data. So the original data no longer looks like the data we had because we've collapsed the list. So we need to be able to identify the fact that we've done that, and we do that through looking at the intent report. In other words, what actions have we imparted upon this data to change it in some way that we can look back and go, right, okay, I can see what we've done with the data, why it no longer looks the same as the other data, and why it's not appropriate for other things we might want to do with it. So you can see within here, it's created two aggregated items. You'll see that it's given it the order, that's the -1. Don't forget that, otherwise it will just overwrite it. And it tells us within here exactly what it was that we did. So we created first action, gave it this value, and we said to drop any tables that, any columns that we weren't interested in. Finally, let's look at the resulting names. So we saw this just a bit earlier. So as you can see, all of the phone number and email address have now gone. And if we go to the bottom of the list, you'll see it's got phone number and email address. And obviously we then just repeat that for each of these here through using this here to be able to extract them all out, and then obviously create the loop through this one here, and so on. So the next thing I wanted to look at then, so now let's go and look at what this looks like and why it's important that we understand this. So first of all, we can now profile this, because obviously we've got a single column. The single column now can tell us things like, yeah, there's all numbers, but it can also say, oh yeah, but there isn't all the emails. There's only 4 emails that are in here of all the numbers that we've got. So we can start doing proper profiling now that they are a single column. The challenge we have is the data is no longer the same. So as you can see from the original data, we've got email address under a list, we've then got phone number under a list, we've got city and all the rest of it that are all different entities under this list. But when we go and look at the results table, which is our table that we've applied that to, see here that we've still got a city and all those sort of things under there. But now phone number and email address are now a single entry within this, so they no longer belong to, well, they're part of contract, but they no longer belong to this list because they're no longer lists, they're now single entries within this, or a list of entries obviously in the table itself. So they can't be representative of each other, so there is a mismatch between the data and we can't rebuild it again. So it's very, very important that we understand when we're changing the data, the fact that that data is now changed and its meaning has now been changed as well. And we must be really, really clear on what we're then going to do with that data, because we don't want to mess up and lose that transparency and traceability. And the final thing I'll say on that transparency and traceability is that is one of the key reasons why we don't try and do any of these changes within the flattening and the nesting of the data, because then it hides from us exactly what's going on and the data no longer looks the same.